Hey, we're here and we're back on the podcast with Dr. Nancy Irwin. And Dr. Irwin is a Los Angeles-based licensed clinical psychologist. She's a therapeutic hypnotist. She's an author who specializes in addictions, trauma resolution, and sports enhancement. Her book is called U-Turn, Changing Direction in Midlife, and she's also a co-author in Breaking Through Stories of Hope and Recovery. So we're going to talk today about this amazing idea of reinventing yourself, how to handle the naysayers who try to sabotage you along the way, and just how to ensure success, perhaps with tools like hypnosis and other psychology facts and figures we need to know about. So, Dr. Nancy, glad to be speaking with you.
Thank you for having me, Robert. A pleasure.
Pleasure's mutual. And so what did I leave out there when I introduced you, put your bio in there, hyped you up for the audience? What are you currently focused on? What just has you so excited?
Well, I'm writing 2 books now at once, which I don't recommend. I don't share anything about it, but writers, we like to keep everything in private. But I am working on 2 books, which is wonderful to just put out there and make it become a reality.
Wonderful. So you've learned all these things, and when it's ready for prime time, it'll be your turn to give back. And we know that you have all of these accomplishments, right? You are a stand-up comedian. You've been on The Doctors, Dr. Drew, Megyn Kelly, Bravo, CNN, all these things. And so what are you all about when someone says, hey, Dr. Nancy, I need help. I'm stuck. I've tried all these things. Nothing works. What is your specialty? What's your solution?
Well, I like people to know that traumas can be resolved. We can't erase the memory or make them go away, but we can certainly take a lesson learned from them. Because no matter what we go through, there's always a lesson to be learned. Having overcome several traumas myself, I can tell you that. So I enjoy being a healer, helping other people heal themselves. I would never be so arrogant to say I'm healing them. I help them on the path and encourage them that if I can heal, so can they. And I've learned a few tricks along the way of allowing them to do that.
Well, I love it, and I'm excited to jump into some of those tricks. And you already mentioned a few interesting things, right? That we can't forget the past, and many times something that has happened years ago just kind of still triggers us, right? Still chases us around, and it would be great if we can get to that point where we can kind of look back and use that as a lesson of what not to do, what not to repeat in the future, how to do better, all of those different things. And then you also mentioned this idea that we perhaps have to have ownership of our problems, right? That no one else really caused, no one caused our problems to the extent that they did. And it's up to us to move past it, and no one will fix our problems for us. We have to kind of take it in and learn and do that work. And so when someone says, all right, I have trauma, like, is there an easy way to categorize this? Is there a pie chart? Is there like more types of trauma than others? I'm just trying to get my head around this word trauma. It's thrown around. So when someone comes to you with trauma, like, what does that usually look like?
Great question. Trauma comes from the Greek word that means wound. So anything that has been a wound specifically to the soul is what we want to heal. That could be any sort of abuse you can name. It could be the death of someone primary in your life at a freakishly early age that was unexpected. It could be a natural disaster, an act of God. It could be anything that can be wounding to the soul or the body too, which typically wounds the soul, can be overcome though. And, we have all in some way been a victim of someone else. We've been a victim of circumstances. I mean, the word victim gets such a bad word, but I always tell people, look, you were a victim as a kid. You weren't responsible for what a perpetrator did to you, but you don't have to stay a victim now. You're not a victim of your past. So you can turn your victimization into your empowerment. And there are certainly ways to do that. There are lots of ways in psychology that we work to deal with that. It's through psychotherapy. It's through brain spotting. It's through thought management. It's through EMDR, which is eye movement, desensitization and reprocessing. It's through hypnosis. It's through journaling, meditation. But it's becoming responsible for where you are now and moving forward. It doesn't mean you have to forgive someone or condone it, not at all, but you also don't want to blame yourself. You want to, or for where you are now. You want to take responsibility and move forward. And yes, again, I always say there's always a lesson learned. So we find ways to keep the wisdom and let the pain go.
Ooh, I like that a lot. Keep the wisdom and let the pain go. And you're at the present moment where you are now. All you can do moving forward is to think better and do better and act better. And so you list all these wonderful tools in the toolbox, right? You mentioned EMDR and journaling and all these things that we could do. And so when someone when you're like looking at like which tool do I use to deal with this problem, what's the decision making process there? Is it like you ask someone like what have they tried already, or do you have a conversation? Like how do they decide like which to use first or in what combination?
Um, every situation is different. Most people see on my website what they would like to try or what's worked before and they need to do it again. But that's part of the intake process. And I always ask them what their history of treatment has been, what worked, what didn't work, and I explain the various modalities and see what they're willing to try, what they would like to try, and also have a whole. They explain to me what their list of traumas are. We don't start off with the worst thing. That's way too much. It's like going to graduate school before you've done elementary school. So we start small. I always say we start with the traumas with a little t before we move to the ones with a capital T. Because many times traumas get stored in the brain like a block of ice. EMDR sort of melts that away so your psychological energy can flow. So even if you have a list of, let's say, 40 traumas, they tend to get clustered together. So we treat one or two, and some of the others begin to collapse because the brain is like dominoes. It wants to heal. So we treat a few things, and then it just automatically sort of heals the next ones. This is in a nutshell, of course, but that's basically how it tends to go.
This is
It's
fascinating to
fascinating.
think about.
It is. It's
Yeah.
fascinating to watch.
Ooh, yeah.
It
And
happened 40, 50 years ago, and we do the treatment now, and you just watch people's bodies soften and the tension just sort of falls away before your very eyes. It's pretty amazing.
well, that's a nice reframe, right? Because I think that it's really tempting to just bury things under the carpet, right? To just say, hey, I've got all this trauma, and I'll just push it deep. I'll bottle it up, as they say. And it's great to instead. It's exciting to think about that, like, well, maybe these things are linked together, and that you start with the small ones and build this momentum. And sometimes that house of cards will collapse because you dealt with the little traumas first, and that seems like a much healthier way to go about it, right? Because now we're in this more enlightened day and age. If we had this conversation in 1850 or 1950, they'd say, hey, just get over it, right? Go back to work. But now we're like, hey, we can get more in touch with our feelings. And so, we've mentioned EMDR a couple of times, this eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And you mentioned your website, and all these things are listed there at drnancyirwin.com. And there's also a phone number that we'll drop, and we'll drop it at the end as well, 310-235-2882. And that's at drnancyirwin.com. But as far as EMDR, I've heard of it. I've never even seen a YouTube about it. I don't know what it is, but it sounds interesting. So what is EMDR?
It's been around for about 50 years, so it's evidence based. And the woman who started it, who's passed away now, couldn't ever fully explain exactly how it works. We just know after all this time it's given profound relief to many, many traumatized people. Does it work for everyone? No, nothing does. Prozac doesn't even work for depression for everyone. Nothing works for everyone, but it's worked for a hell of a lot of people, self included. So it's basically EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a series of bilateral movements. I do it the old fashioned way, the original way it was done, the original recipe, and that's following fingers with eye. You feel like you're watching a tennis match. You don't move your head, only your eyes. And there's something about that bilateral movement that goes through the optic nerve to the hippocampus. That's the part of the brain where most memories are stored. And it sort of scrambles the encoding. And then the D stands for desensitization. We desensitize all the physical symptoms of a trauma, the upset stomach, the rapid heart beating, the sweating, the headache, the pain, the numbness in the limbs, etc. So we desensitize that and return you to a relaxed body. And then the R is the reprocessing. So we reprocess, and that is where you take the lesson learned from the event rather than staying with the old meaning. For example, I was beat by a kid because I was the wrong gender, or my father hated me. That's why he beat me because I'm a bad, stupid, whatever that belief is. We shift that old unhelpful belief into something more helpful, which is that was the only tool of discipline my father knew. Not an excuse, but it lets you off the hook from feeling like you're bad, stupid, whatever the deal is.
That's spooky, but also cool. And I think about this idea a lot. You think about the childhood memories, especially. There's the story, the narrative that you tell yourself, right? And there's like maybe there's like 12 or 15 like cause and effect things that happen, and but then there's all this extra baggage, right? Well, this happened because I'm a bad person, and all these things that don't really belong there, right? And that aren't helpful. So I like this idea of like scrambling the brain and revisit it and giving it a better meaning, because when you look at it from a big picture point of view, like it's not helping at all, right? It's just making us feel bad on a loop, on repeat, decades later, with people that might be dead, that we might not even, we'll never see again. So it's just like haunting us, and we don't want that. We want to
Right.
move past it.
And it's never too, yeah. And the cool thing is, it's never too late to heal. This could have occurred 40, 60 years ago, and it's never too late to heal and get yourself back in your own instrument with a clearer head.
Very nice. And so we've kind of got a lay of the land about what you do. We got a little bit of a taste of one of these techniques. What I love to hear about in podcasts are stories, and especially stories of struggling and later on overcoming. So what do you have in the story category for us, Dr. Nancy? Like a story from you or a story from someone you helped? Like what's interesting to discuss?
Well, I can't break confidentiality of any patients that I've treated. I guess I could share some of my own stories, which is actually what brought me into this field. I was a victim of adolescent clergy abuse, and millions have gone through that. And I was determined I was not going to be stuck in the mindset that I'm only as good as my sexuality. I'm less than, I deserved it, it was my fault. Those are all the negative beliefs that I got plugged into as a teen. And I've certainly seen plenty others get plugged into that and similar beliefs like that. So it helped me completely get free of that and see this is his issue. Had nothing to do with me. I was the victim of opportunity. I was there and convenient, if you will. But that's a whole different way to look at it. And that lets me off the hook rather than thinking it was my fault. He picked me because he knew, all this stuff, that these stories that we tend to make up when we're victims of a trauma or perpetrator in any way.
So these things happen, and we kind of tell ourselves these stories, and we sometimes need another person to kind of like reset it, retell it to us. And when you are helping out these people with these sort of similar traumas, what kind of resistance do you come across? Because I know like sometimes I'll do like talk therapy, and someone will tell me something that maybe I won't believe or won't stick with me, but then like 3 weeks later it'll start working, and sometimes I have to really work on it. So when it's one thing to say, it's not about you, it's about them, as an example. But like in order to like break through and change some beliefs and make your clients feel better, like what kind of difficulties do you have just making this change happen?
Well, most people who take the time and spend the money to go into a therapist's office really know what's wrong, what's not working, and what they'd like to change. It's not up to me to tell them what I think they need. That would be my playing God. And my take is you tell me what you want to be different, what's not working, where do you feel stuck? And together I will lead you on the path, but you're the one doing the changing. I, I'm very well trained and experienced, yes, but I don't have all the answers. But my job is to encourage you on the path to unkink the knots and let go what's not working and come up with a new set of beliefs that can change your behavior.
I
Does that
like it.
answer your question? Yeah.
Yeah,
Mo-
unkink the knots, and you're saying how important it is to kind of have this inventory, so to speak, and know like, okay, well, I don't have the answers, but I know what the problems are. I know what's not working, and I need help to cross the bridge. But at least I have a starting point. I don't just say, hey, Dr. Nancy, solve all my problems. This better be good.
right. But I can tell you, in working with tons of addictions, it goes hand in hand with trauma work because only about 99.9% of people who suffer from any sort of addictions have trauma in the background. It's like a no brainer. It's like, duh, nobody chooses to be a drug addict or a gambling addict. They're trying to escape some sort of pain, some sort of trauma they went through or negative belief that they took on or were told, and they bought it at a time when they were very vulnerable and they kept it. And the addiction has worked to some degree until it doesn't. So it helped them numb out to the pain, but then ironically, of course, it always ends up causing more pain. So this could be a process addiction, which is like gambling or porn addiction or shopping or sex addiction. All of these things, yeah, gambling is huge, or any sort of substance abuse. Once you can uncover what made you start into that, then it's much easier to let the, the addiction is a symptom of something underlying that hasn't been resolved. So you look at it like
This
this
is very
marvelous
helpful, and
form.
it's
Good.
yeah.
Sorry, I mean to cut you off.
Oh yeah. All right. That's your done. No, continue, please.
No, I was just gonna say it gets to be a marvelous mystery that you go on together and you discover what that individual needs. So it is a lot of work because it's an individual. There are no cookie cutters. That's why I encourage people if
Right.
they go online, please don't do hypnosis online. Please don't look at a YouTube video of EMDR online because it gets watered down when it's among the masses like that. You want to go to somebody who's trained in this. It's a highly specific, very sensitive modality, and your life is very sensitive and deserves all the respect of going to someone who's qualified to lead you through this process rather than someone who's been taking shortcuts and is trying to dilute it down to something that it's not. Then you end up hating it, thinking it didn't work, and then yeah, you get even more
That
depressed or anxious
yeah.
or
And then now you're closed off to it. It's like, would you go on YouTube to figure out how to give yourself a filling? Would you watch like a dentist tutorial on YouTube? Well, who knows what kind of information you get, and if you mess it up, you might say, "Oh, well, that just didn't work. I shouldn't even try to go to the dentist." So you're saying go to a professional to look into hypnosis and EMDR, because if you don't, you run the risk of it not working, and then you just write off that technique when it's a valid technique for yourself to try.
yes, or you could get further re-traumatized.
Ooh. And we don't want that. But that idea of the trauma and the addiction being linked, that's very interesting. And that's like you keep hearing about that, and I've spent years just kind of getting my head wrapped around that idea that like the trauma caused the addiction and the addiction caused the trauma, and you just get caught in this loop, this cycle, and it can be difficult to break out of it. And there's just so many of these techniques and problems that we need to be aware of. And in these last few minutes of our conversation, is there like one really important thing about psychology, therapy, hypnosis that you think is not discussed enough that you think should be?
Ooh, wow. I'm going to have to think about that one. There's so many. I guess the main thing is I don't want people to think that there's any shortcut. Not that you have to be in therapy for 8,000 years and go 4 times a week. No. I'm committed to getting people out of pain as quickly as possible without sacrificing quality. But it's something you can't rush. I mean, yes, self help books are great. It's a great beginning and it spreads awareness and knowledge and psychoeducation, but you really do want to try to, especially now, there's so many great resources for finding a good therapist. Go on to psychologytoday.com and find someone, hopefully in your insurance program, that can give you the attention that your issues need. Please take care of this because that is it's primary. And you're doing it for everyone else in your life. It's not just for you.
Ooh, and because it's easy to write off your own low self-esteem, right? And say, oh, well, who am I to fix my problem? And you're saying, well, this affects your other relationships. And I find that very valuable in the same way that if you wanted, going back to the dentist example, or like brain surgeon or something, if you wanted to study to be a brain surgeon or a dentist, you wouldn't just read the book. You'd go to class, you'd do the homework, you'd do on-the-job training, and the book is just one part of it. And so I understand the point here of if you just stick with the book learning, it's very superficial and you might not get the progress that you deserve unless you go to an actual professional licensed therapist by going to psychologytoday.com. And so now that we're near the end of our show, it's time to plug some stuff, right? You have your website, drnancyirwin.com, and you have your excellent book, U-Turn, Changing Direction in Midlife, over 40 stories of people over 40. So if someone was impressed by some of your insights today, Dr. Nancy, like what are these resources about? What should someone go do after listening to our conversation?
Well, if they want to reinvent, if they're stuck in a job or a career or a relationship or anything else that just doesn't work for them, I hope they'll read the book and see that it's never too late to live a life that you love. Uh, I always say change happens. You can either effect it or accept it. So the stories in the book are divided between those who chose change because they were bored or wanted something more, and those who life did it for them. They got dumped. They had an accident or some sort of tragedy that changed one aspect of their life, or some sort of awareness that came over them in middle age, or a setback due to an addiction. So it's read this to see that it's never too late to live a life you love.
Very inspiring. Never too late to live a life you love, and ideally be the person
Yep.
that happens to life instead of life
Yep.
happening to you. And so you said that book is YOU Turn by Dr. Nancy B. Irwin. And then that website is drnancyirwin.com. And before we say goodbye, Dr. Nancy, it's time for the scary part of the show where I try to put you on the spot and I ask for a fun quote or lesson that has served you in life or in business. So what comes to mind for you as far as a fun quote or lesson?
Gosh, so many. I have a zillion quotes that I love. This one's not so funny. So pardon me, it won't be funny. It's going to be deep. One of my favorite quotes ever. It was by Booker T. Washington, who said, I have learned to judge a man not by his success in life, but rather the pathway that took him, what he overcame while trying to succeed.
That's a much more interesting story, right? The twists and turns, the speed bumps, the obstacles that you had to figure out to get there. The conflict, the stress. I love it. So that's what defines
Yep.
us and by the problems we have and how we come across it. And if you need some of this help that Dr. Nancy Irwin has been discussing here, we said the book is U-Turn by Dr. Nancy B. Irwin, and that website, DRNANCYIRWIN.com, drnancyirwin.com. You go to that website and there's a phone number on top. We mentioned it before. That's 310-235-2882. And if that's too many numbers because it's a podcast, no worries. Go to drnancyirwin.com. It's right there on top. She'd love to speak with you. And she also just gave us all of kinds of resources that we can click around and find out about therapy services, weight management, trauma recovery, test anxiety. There's so many things that we can get educated on, and you can get past your past. And early intervention is best for trauma recovery. It's never too late to resolve trauma and decrease or disappear symptoms. So the very next step is to check out drnancyirwin.com, get educated, talk to Dr. Nancy, and or go to Psychology Today and find a therapist in your area. Get help, put another brain on the problem. You can't do everything yourself, and other people are depending on you. Friends, family, coworkers, they need you to be your best self. So you owe it to them, and it's time to do it. And thank you very much, Dr. Nancy, for showing up, stopping by, giving us so much amazing advice. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, Robert.
All right.